Hello and welcome. This is Out Motorsports. My name is Jake and this is the 2020 Mercedes-Benz A220 4MATIC sedan. This is the smallest offering in the Mercedes-Benz sedan lineup, and it competes directly against competitors like the Acura ILX, the Audi A3, and the BMW 2 Series. In decades past, the smallest Mercedes sedan we've been able to buy in the United States has been the C-Class, and in recent years Mercedes supplemented that with the CLA class, which is the four-door coupe version of the A-Class sedan. The C-Class, of course, has gotten bigger alongside rivals like the BMW 3 Series, like the Audi A4, and frankly, for a lot of buyers, myself included, those vehicles, which were once the perfect size, are all just a little bigger than what we'd actually be looking for, and thus, you have a market for sedans that are about the size of this A220. And of course, before we get started, two quick things. Of course, if you like this video and like what we're up to, please do subscribe to us right here on YouTube and give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram. We do really appreciate that support. And you may also notice I'm wearing one of my Out Motorsports t-shirts. We do have these shirts designed and available for sale on our website, outmotorsports.com. So if you're looking to support us beyond a subscription to this channel, please head over to the website and take a look. I'll put a link to the shirts in the description below. Now with that said, let's get started. Now, the nice thing about the A-Class in America is that there aren't that many options to it. Every A220 is powered by a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that makes 188 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque, and they're all paired to a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic that Mercedes calls 7G-tronic. You can get the A220 as front-wheel drive standard with optional 4MATIC all-wheel drive. Now, the nice thing about this particular press loan is that it's actually not fully loaded. We do often get loans that have all the options, very high sticker prices, because the manufacturers want us to see every potential option that the vehicle could have for the sake of evaluation. This A220 is a fairly simple build. It is base black on black with Mbtex, which is vinyl, not leather. The wheels that you see here are an optional 18-inch design, but really, aside from a few options on the interior of this A220, this is a somewhat base build. Now, the MSRP of my particular vehicle comes to about $41,000. These cars with the all-wheel drive come in the mid-30s. So like I said, there are some options here, but this is not as exorbitantly built as you can get. You can build an A220 4MATIC, not the AMG version, somewhere into the low to mid $50,000 range, which, if you're careful, will get you into an E-Class. So Mercedes sedan lineup goes A, C, E, and you can skip right over the C and get into a more base level E-Class or a fairly well-equipped C-Class for A-Class money if you really want to. But Mercedes did introduce some new technology with the launch of this A220, and frankly, for those people who are looking for a sedan that's not as big as a C-Class or especially not as big as an E-Class, it's really nice to see them offer such a modern take on the compact sedan with, of course, Mercedes touches. Now, one thing before we start with this A220 has a proximity key, much like most other new cars. And this is something I've noticed with all new Mercedes-Benz products, not just the A220, but this is the first time I've thought to demo it for all of you. When you turn off and get out of most new Mercedes products, the gauge cluster screen reminds you to not forget your key. That's a really nice little touch. There's a warning tone, it says don't forget your key, and you say, oh, thanks, Mercedes, as you get out and leave and lock the car. The interesting thing is when you unlock the car and get inside, it also reminds you to not forget your key. Now, presumably you can't forget it if you've just unlocked the door and are about to push the start button, but I suppose it is a nice touch. It just strikes me as a little bit of an oversight with the software programming. So anyway, let's see how that works before we hop in and go for a drive. All right, so I have the key in my pocket, grab the door, you'll note the mirror unfolds, and then as soon as I get in, it's gonna chime and say, don't forget your key. All right, so driving the 2020 Mercedes-Benz A220 4MATIC sedan. Like I said, this is now the smallest offering in Mercedes-Benz's sedan lineup. And in the past, you would have had to look to the Mercedes-Benz C-Class for their compact sedan offering. It's the analog to the BMW 3 Series, the Audi A4, things like that. And what many automakers have done is they've upsized their different models for the sake of the model growing with the buyer. So if the buyer picks out, say, a C-Class when they're young, in their late 20s, careers taking off, they want a nice, fun sedan, they pick a C-Class, and then the theory goes that they want to grow the C-Class with the owner a little bit so they can buy multiple C-Classes. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you might want your old C-Class, but with a modern design and modern technology and modern drivetrain, and unfortunately everything has really grown up. So the A-Class is now here for those who are looking for old C-Class size in a newer package. And of course, in decades past, all Mercedes sedans were rear-wheel drive, and with this A220, we see a shift in the United States with this architecture to front-wheel drive, still with the optional 4MATIC all-wheel drive. And a lot of people are going to complain that, oh, Mercedes has lost the plot and they don't know how to build a good car anymore, and this is ridiculous, it's the same as a Corolla. And I mean, really, it's not. Most buyers of these cars don't know or care if they're front drive or rear drive biased. And really, at this point, we as an automotive society have sold everyone so hard on the idea of all-wheel drive that most people are going to buy these things with 4MATIC. So yes, it's a front-biased all-wheel drive system, but you're still buying something that can spin all four tires. The 4MATIC in this car can send up to 50% of the power and torque to the rear wheels, so it cannot go full rear-wheel drive. But it can certainly try if you're looking to get through some bad weather or if you're pushing in any sort of cornering or performance driving situation. Now, of course, when we talk about performance, we have to talk about the drivetrain in the A220. Like I said, all A220s are powered by the same turbocharged four-cylinder that makes 188 horsepower and 221 pound-feet of torque. It's not a bad drivetrain. It makes a lot of its power kind of throughout the rev range with the peak up towards about 5,000, and it makes a lot of its torque down low around 1,800 to 2,000. So certainly a willing engine that I think has a lot to offer, and when you have the chance to let it run down an on-ramp or on a back road, it does have good enough power delivery. And I wouldn't call it the fastest thing in the world, but it's certainly not slow. I think quick is a good word to describe how the A220 feels. It weighs something like 3,400 pounds with the all-wheel drive system, depending on options, of course. Now, the all-wheel drive is unobtrusive. I didn't really have a chance to try it out in any scenario that would push the car, but the biggest complaint that I have with this car is the transmission. Like I said, all A220s have a 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, so it is an automated manual. And I think I would feel differently about this transmission if I didn't know that the Volkswagen DSG existed. Volkswagen and Audi have really perfected the dual-clutch, and it just makes it hard to compare almost anything else to it until you get into the really high-end stuff. And this DCT is just not tuned well enough for being a DCT. I think if you're looking to build the car with not so sporty intentions, a torque converter automatic would be a much better fit to the character of this car. And if you're looking to have a DCT for the sake of performance, it needs to respond to the paddles. It needs to stay in a gear when you ask it to and not upshift after 10 or 12 seconds of inactivity. And it needs to be smoother away from a stoplight. If you are in comfort or sport mode and you put your foot down from a red light with the auto start stop turned off, so the engine is already running, there is a noticeable delay and kind of this jump forward as the transmission engages and starts letting the car accelerate. And I understand the fact that it's not a torque converter automatic and it never will be, but frankly, there are other dual clutch transmissions that do this better, and it makes for a really clunky driving experience around town when you're looking for light throttle, a lot of starting and stopping, and the paddles don't respond with any sort of quickness, which kind of makes them useless if you're trying to hustle through a series of sweeping curves or get down an on-ramp with some urgency. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to override the programming that I don't love in this DCT and shift it myself, you're not going to get the best shifting performance out of it, which is just kind of a bummer. Now, I mentioned comfort and sport modes. This car does have the optional adjustable suspension. It costs about $850 and has shocks that will firm up or loosen up at the touch of a button with your selectable drive modes. There are 3 different suspension options for the A220. There's the regular A220 suspension, which is non-adjustable and on the standard cars. Then there's this optional controllable suspension that goes between comfort and sport modes with the struts. And then there is also a lowered suspension that is non-adjustable that you can have on the AMG line, which is the kind of hotted up A220 that doesn't have the AMG A35 drivetrain put in it. So whatever I say about the A220 with the adjustable suspension may not apply to the other two variants, so just keep that in mind. Now, with that in mind, the suspension on this car goes between wayward and pretty sharp. And what I found interesting is driving through a city environment like Washington, D.C., I would usually want to leave the suspension in its most comfortable setting. There's a lot of rough roads, potholes, things you don't want to feel. And again, on the highway, I would want to do the same thing. I want the smoothest ride possible. I'd only put the car in sport mode for the sake of off-ramps, autocross, track days, things like that. And the interesting thing is that the car in comfort mode really doesn't know what it's doing with itself. The suspension feels underdamped between the compression and the rebound, and the chassis is just not as well composed as I would hope. But the interesting thing is all of that goes away when you put it in sport mode. Suddenly the car feels very composed, very easy to handle, and it soaks up bumps and handles everything really well. So just kind of an odd sensation to have something that is so strange feeling in comfort mode, but firms up well and is very responsive in sport. So I think, again, you know, this is a tuning thing over anything else. And it's just interesting. I think if I purchased this particular suspension setup, I would just drive the car everywhere in sport mode. Now, like I said earlier in the video, this particular car's MSRP is about $41,000. This is a fairly base car with a few notable options. The first option being the dual 10 1/4 inch screens in the dashboard. They look like one expansive screen when the car is turned off. You've got one in front of the steering wheel for gauges and one to the right for the infotainment system, which is the newest MBUX system that premiered on this A-Class and on the Sprinter van of all other vehicles. But the one thing that the Sprinter didn't have that the A-Class does have is augmented reality in the navigation. So if you use the Mercedes built-in nav system for your destination, as a turn comes up, it will show a blue arrow with the name of the street sign pointed whichever way you need to go, and some arrows that are kind of animated, kind of like in old racing games where they're telling you which way to turn next. It's a really helpful addition to the navigation system if you're using the Mercedes navigation system. And when I review any vehicle with built-in nav, I try to use it for the sake of evaluation. The interesting thing with MBUX in this car and in the Sprinter is that it's good, but it also sometimes doesn't know where you're going. I had one instance where the car recognized the address I put in, read it back to me, I confirmed it was correct, and the car then proceeded to take me to the middle of a 4-lane highway, which was not where I needed to go and was not the actual address that I had entered that it had confirmed. So not sure what's going on with the mapping. Again, probably a small update, but it was just kind of a strange thing with this brand new system to have it send me just to the middle of a road. I think the sweet spot for these cars is in the low to mid $40,000 range. I think above that you start looking at the bigger cars, whether you like the size or not, and you have to really, really want something this size to pay more than like 43, 44 grand for one of these. But you can cleverly option them, and you don't need to spend a lot to get a car that feels substantial. This car has the Mbtex vinyl seats, which are not real leather. Mercedes has been using Mbtex for decades, and we know it will hold up to 500,000 miles with showing almost no wear at all. These seats are some of the most comfortable seats I've sat in recently, and I don't feel the need to have the optional sport seats. I don't feel the need to have leather. I think this car's sweet spot is kind of lightly to moderately equipped at a light to moderate price for a Mercedes-Benz, and it's really a pleasant car to drive even with the dual clutch tuning issues, and it really is a pleasant car to drive. It's really quite fun through an off-ramp, through some twisty curves. I've enjoyed it there. It does fall down a bit when you get it in the city, but I think some of that could be rectified with just different transmission tuning above all else. And with that, that is the 2020 Mercedes-Benz A220 4MATIC sedan. Thanks so much for coming along today. A full written review of this A220 will be available at outmotorsports.com and linked in the description below. And as with every video, if you like what we're up to, please do take a second, subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. Thanks so much for coming along, and we'll see you again soon.